you're way down the back there and you're a bit short-sighted, you can view those on your netbook, real time as I'm going through. Hopefully that'll keep working. And I also potentially have people out on the internet watching this. So I also have a web page up on my SharePoint site on the internet, which is including the audio and video of the session as well. Just thought I'd try that. So what we're going to look at today really is discuss some of the architectural changes in SharePoint 2010. And two of the key areas that I'm going to drill on, because there's a lot of new stuff in there, but two key ones are the new concept of services and search. So quite a bit of work done in those areas. But I'll cover off some of the architectural changes, some of the other changes as well. And then we'll drill into some of the administration things that you'll come across, especially around everything that's in the central admin. And then what you can do with PowerShell. There's a huge amount of things that you can do with PowerShell. And then we'll also have a look at some additional applications. There's a lot of things are built that run on top of SharePoint. Office Web Apps are one. I'll drill into those a little bit, but we've obviously got Project Server and other third-party vendors. And I'll have a little giveaway at the end for a little question that I'll ask, so pay attention, don't fall asleep. And you can win this lovely Arc mouse, which nice white one like I use on my MacBook running Windows 7. It's a great piece of Intel hardware. So yes, this is the only MacBook owned by Microsoft in New Zealand. So anyone who wasn't aware, my role actually now is the Education Technology Strategist for Microsoft, and that was my excuse for getting a netbook so that I could show people that they can dual boot Windows 7. So moving right along. SharePoint architecture. So there are a whole bunch of things. These are just a number of things I pulled out that I thought, gee, these things are all quite different from 2007. And so as I mentioned, the new service model, so there's no SSP anymore in SharePoint, which is great because that was the bane of our kind of stability problems with the old version of SharePoint. Big change to the search architecture, including adding of fast functionality. There's a new secure store, which replaces the old SSO. Had anyone here ever tried installing SSO on a SharePoint farm in 2007? Any hands? No brave people. Here's 2, 3. Yeah, it was hard, and you had to do it in really hard, in a certain order to actually get to go. So the new secure store is quite good. For when you want to store credentials for line of business applications so that your SharePoint web parts or code can go and access those other systems. Another brand new concept is sandbox applications, and this one's really good for IT departments that got really nervous of adding any third-party code to their server because it could cause problems. So we can now take third-party kind of mini solutions, run them in a sandbox inside our SharePoint farm, but have a lot of control over what that code can do. So we can limit how much of the resources that code will use, so it won't bring down the rest of our server. Effectively, allow site collection administrators to upload some little solution into their site collection, and it won't impact any other site collections. There's a whole new client-side API for accessing information stored in SharePoint. This is another good thing. So many people wanted to install their own custom web services or things on top of SharePoint so that their third-party or rich client application or Silverlight or Flash application could read data out of SharePoint. So that's now provided out of the box. One less thing that you have to have custom solution for on your SharePoint server. We also did a lot of work in workflow around the performance of workflow. SharePoint used to run all the workflow previously, and it had some bottlenecks there. That's moved down into the operating system. We let Windows Workflow Foundation run the SharePoint workflows now. Another area that's improved is the timer service. Anyone who is managing SharePoint 2007 knows that if the timer service stopped, you just couldn't do anything else until you could get that started again, and troubleshooting that could be tricky. So a lot more enhancements there around control over where you can run certain jobs, things like that, and a lot better way of analysing the state of various jobs that are running. Also for hosters, some multi-tenanted hosting capability. You don't see any of this in the UI. This all has to be configured with PowerShell, but ideal for ISPs or people that want to, say, host Windows SharePoint Foundation in a multi-tenanted fashion so that all the different people they're hosting SharePoint for have that ability to control their own environment, including some of the farm, what would traditionally be farm settings that would affect everybody. Another big change, probably everyone's aware of this, is the 64-bit capability, or 64-bit only option. So that really means, why not, if you're installing a new server, run Windows Server 2008 R2, which is also 64-bit only. That new option for installing on Windows 7 for development purposes. Now, most developers I speak to kind of laugh at that anyway, and they just install on Windows Server and put up with the fact that they don't, get to suspend their machine. Service accounts was another big one. So we always used to talk about, best practice for service accounts for SharePoint. You need usually about a minimum of 5 accounts. And across multiple servers, you had to go to the security guy and say, I want some service accounts where the password never expires, because we all know how tricky it was to change the service passwords, let alone the service accounts used in a SharePoint farm. So we can now manage those as a service. So SharePoint, you can actually say, I need to update the password on my service accounts, and it will go ahead and do it for you. A whole new security model built into SharePoint, and it's really the core of SharePoint now is claims authentication. You can still run SharePoint sites in the old classic mode, just purely using NTLM or Kerberos, but we have a new claims authentication mode which works with ADFS, which means you can also now support other authentication mechanisms, not only forms-based authentication that we used to have, but things like SAML, anything that you can hook into a security token service as in way of a provider, we can now work with that. Business Connectivity Services, or BCS, fantastic that this was actually embedded into SharePoint Foundation now. So the ability to go and access other line of business applications, web services or databases and expose them in SharePoint just as if they were a list in SharePoint, but without the SharePoint issues of scalability and referential integrity, those sorts of things. So we can now use the great user interface of SharePoint, but have some of that data stored in back-end systems. Support for database mirroring out of the box. So in 2007, you could configure a SQL mirror for your data, but SharePoint itself had no way of failing over to the other SQL Server box. That's now supported out of the box for your content databases. When you create those, you can identify which mirror server you want that content database on. And obviously the PowerShell administration side of things is very big. There's more than 500 commandlets depending on which version of SharePoint you're running, and we'll have a quick look at some of those. And another new area was the SharePoint Workspace. So this was the old Groove server, but it's not just Groove renamed. So there's a whole new protocol for dealing with offline documents and reducing the amount of traffic on the wire so that when someone downloads a document, makes some changes and hits save, we don't send the whole document back, just the differences. Also great for opening very large documents, so we can do byte range transfers with the new protocol that comes with the workspace. So service applications is the one I first of all want to focus on, because in the old days we had the SSP and it had its own admin page in your SharePoint environment, and the problems with it were that just about everything went into one database, so it was very hard to restore that. And it was very hard to delegate permissions to different people to manage different aspects of those shared services. So we have this whole new concept, and it's based on WCF, so the Windows Communication Foundation, which also means it's based on claims authentication for the communication between them. And so the key thing here is that when you have a service, let's take, for example, say the search service, it really has 2 key components to it. It's got the service itself, the service application, and it has a proxy, which is how effectively things can connect to that service. So the key thing is it's not the service instance. So you can have multiple servers in your farm running an instance of a service, but there's only one service application for the farm. And the service application knows how to go and find which servers are running that application. It will load balance between them. So the service application has a lot of ability to control or make it easier for you to control your SharePoint farm. If you go and start a service instance on another server, the service application just knows about that. There's no reconfiguring it. You start balancing the load for that particular service automatically. The other thing is the service application provides all the administration functionality as well, whether that's through central admin or through PowerShell commands or web services. That's up to the service application to provide. Now I'm going to show you, we have a lot of service applications now rather than just the SSP, but all of those service applications run inside one IIS website by default. So when you install SharePoint, if you run the wizard, that magically configures everything and everything works, which is a fantastic thing. They're all in one iOS website, and we also recommend that you leave it that way. Unless you can find a particular reason, we've worked out that the best performance is had by having all of those web services in the one website. Now the other thing is that you can have, for a web application, you can only have one proxy for a particular service, but multiple web applications on a front-end server can share that same proxy to connect through to the service applications. And in most cases, that's what you want. You can have different web applications using a different proxy, but they're still going to go to the one service application in that farm, unless you want that proxy to connect to a different farm. So we do now have the ability for a service application to service another farm. Not all service applications can do that, but quite a few can. So this kind of can scale out and can scale up. It's a good framework for all of the services to be built, not only the Microsoft ones, but third-party ones as well. So as I said, it load balances the instances, provides the admin functions. The other key thing is that every instance can look after its own configuration database, or its for storing session information. If it wants a database, it has its own database. The good thing here is you can back those up and restore them individually, unlike the old SSP, which everyone knows if you try to restore that, search, good luck trying to get search going again. That was very, very tricky. So this is kind of the model now for all the service applications, all the ones from SharePoint and third parties. The other thing is when you configure your farm, you get a default group of these service applications. So when all the service applications are created, by default they're all put into a group. So every time you create a web application, you can just say, I just want to use the default, have the default set of proxies available for this particular web application. So you can have the default set, but then you can do, if you want to run a web application and only have a very small number of these services that are on your farm available, you can do that as well to only allow some of them. So for example, you don't have everyone with an eCal. You don't have to have some of those service applications that require the eCal available to a web application. So these are all the services out of the box for the enterprise version with web applications and project server installed. So there's quite a few of them. What I've indicated on here is which service applications have their own database. So the little database symbol indicates those ones have their own database to start with. And also the asterisk indicates whether they support remote connections from other farms. So proxies running on other farms connecting to the service application running on this farm. Classic example where you do that is for search, enterprise search, but you've got a couple of reasons why you need different SharePoint farms for different parts of the business. They can still connect and use that enterprise search capability. The Office web applications one, I'll give you a demo of those later on. Anyone who's not seen those, very powerful. They don't use the database at all, so they pretty much do session information in memory, and they use the file system for caching. So any of those ones that don't have a database, they're pretty much using some memory or potentially caching stuff on the file system. Okay, the other big change was in search. So this was the situation we had in 2007. We had a couple of bottlenecks. The biggest one was a single point of failure, being the indexer. In your SharePoint farm, you could only have one physical box doing indexing, and that's why a lot of people often built multiple farms. So we had that parent-child relationship for searching. Very, very hard to keep search working. So that was a big bottleneck and a single point of failure. We also really only had one database storing all of the metadata that we were crawling. And not only that, while the crawler was trying to write data into that database, the query servers were trying to read out of it. So there's a lot of conflict going on there in SQL Server. It was very hard to get good performance over, say, 50 million documents and have some real-time updating of the index. Got quite challenging. The other thing we had to do was copy the full text catalog out to all the front-end servers that were running the query role. So we had some problems there that front-end servers might run out of disk space, and as soon as one front-end server ran out of disk space, the other one decided it better stop as well, and you had no querying capability from your end-user point of view. So there's a whole lot of problems, and I know that Troy Kirkland's doing a session on troubleshooting SharePoint, and that's probably one of the biggest premier support call things we had was around search is broken, how do I get it started again? So we've done a lot of work to make that a lot better. So some of the areas that we've worked on is you can now have multiple indexes, which is great. So you can scale those out, or you can put the indexes nearer to where the content is. They're also stateless, these crawlers, so that also helps. That one of the problems with SharePoint was if it got into a bad state when you tried to start up search, it would go, sorry, I don't really know what I'm meant to be doing, so I'm not going to start. It was always very tricky to get search going when it got into a bad state. The other thing now is we can distribute the crawlers, so we can have them in different locations. We can also do now what we call query mirroring and partitioning. So instead of having to have all of our, say, front-end servers doing querying, we can specify which query servers are going to be used for which types of content. So the difference between our SharePoint content versus the content we're crawling on file systems, or if we're crawling a business data catalog, things like that, we can spread those around now. And we can also have multiple property databases. So the key thing when we do a search is we're doing a full text search from the query server, and we're also checking the property database, which has all the metadata, all the rankings, stuff like that stored in it. So we can also have multiple ones of those completely separated from what the crawler's doing. We also still have an admin database and the admin component itself. So that's kind of search, scale up, scale out. Most people are still going to have your 3-server farm if you're a small to medium organisation, so you're still going to have that all on the one box, but it's very easy to move things around. And how all of those search components work, they all have a proxy. So on all the servers, you've still got the proxy to get to the query service. So you define the query service, and the web front end, the query server, the crawl server, they all still have the query proxy on them. And as I said, the database now, we've got a separate property database and a crawl database. So there's not going to be that conflict that we used to have in SQL Server across those. And as I say, when you have your query servers, you can define which partition the index is going to have. Again, most people are just going to have one. A single server now scales quite well to 100 million documents because we've got rid of a lot of that contention. So unless you're really going, greater than 100 million documents, you probably still get away with a single application server to do all the searching or all the crawling, and 2 web front ends doing the query. So just a couple of architecture tips. I'm not going to go into the small farm, medium farm, large farm thing. We've done that to death for a couple of years. So what this really is about, definitely use SQL Server 2008, but also use SQL Server 2008 R2. So if you use R2 on both of them, you get a whole lot of performance benefits. If you're using the enterprise version for SQL Server, you get backup compression, a whole lot of good things like that to save disk space. Now, virtualization is good. Now, in 2007 and certainly in 2003, we used to say, virtualization, if you have to, go and do it. But now we fully support virtualization. And even third-party virtualization vendors can certify SharePoint 2010 on their platform. So we have a certification program for that. Now, one of the key things is though, just be careful, because we used to say 4 gigs of RAM and 8 gigs is now the new 4. So the idea is that a lot of things really need 8 gigs to get going, because there's a whole lot more services now. They all run .NET code. We want them all compiled, sitting in memory, so they perform really well. So memory's cheap, everyone says, but it gets quite expensive on your big ESX or Hyper-V server, so plan ahead. Now, obviously, it's very hard to virtualize I/O, so my preference personally is still have SQL Server, a good SQL Server cluster or a mirror on some physical hardware. And this would be the sort of scenario you might have. Now, you're going to probably find you'll be more tempted in 2010 to have a second application server. So in 2007, most people just had one, might put a second one in if you had reporting services and SharePoint integration mode. But now, if you're going to virtualize it, you can do this, so that while both hosts are running, you can use the performance of both of them, but if one of your hosts goes down, you can move those VMs onto the other host. Obviously, you might struggle with resources. You certainly don't want something like memory overcommit running on a SharePoint farm. That would be worse than half the performance. But a lot of people say, we also want to put SQL in that farm because, the budget for the project is only 2 servers and virtualize everything. But this is kind of really what you need to do. If you're looking at doing that, it's a fair bit of RAM per host. So you want to look at something like 96 gigs of RAM. And this would be for a fairly a large organisation. There'd probably be, I don't know, a handful of organisations that would need something this big. There is also this thing called the HP Sizer tool, which has been just updated for SharePoint 2010. And the good thing about that is it's got a tick box that says, yes, I want to virtualize it. And it will come up with the hardware specs that you need from HP to go off in order. It gives you a bill of materials for the kit to go in order to host SharePoint in a virtual environment. So that tool's quite good, very simple to use. I'll just quickly show you that one. It's about a 50 meg download from the HP website. So this is kind of a plug for the sponsor, HP, major sponsor. And so you can go and build a solution. You can save these solutions. I've used this tool in many years over MCS, and I used to run it 4 or 5 times with different parameters to see what the impact on the hardware recommendation was. Some things would have a big impact, and other things, surprisingly, a small impact. But you whiz through and specify your requirements for your farm. So we say we want an enterprise solution because everyone wants an enterprise solution. Can you specify your number of potential users, the concurrency percentage, the number of user requests per hour. You can whiz through and specify a bunch of different parameters. I'll just get through to the answer. Okay, turn a few of these on. So this is an example where if you're running in a virtualized environment, and because on your intranet SharePoint servers are relatively cheap because most of the cost is in the CAL, specifying this will basically give us a virtual machine per service. High availability. Okay, we can say we only want Intel. And this is where we can turn on that we want a Hyper-V R2 solution. You'll notice it's missing any competitors' information here. That's not my doing, that's HP have actually recognised that the best value for money now is to use Hyper-V. If you believe that. Okay, finish that. Okay, so it makes a couple of recommendations for me, and I'll take those recommendations. So it says some things aren't recommended. And there goes our basic solution, a 24-core Hyper-V server. That's quite nice, isn't it? In an active cluster. We're going to go back to work and put in a request for one of those. Okay. So the final solution goes off and calculates for me and tells me what services are going to run on which virtual machines. So it's quite a detailed report. I can use this as part of your design for your SharePoint farm. Doesn't take normally very long. Come back to that when it finishes. Okay, it's a real struggle trying to do a presentation in an hour when it used to take an hour and 15 minutes. So if you want to give any feedback, I think most of us are struggling not having time for questions. So the other thing I was going to switch over to now is some of the administration things you have to get used to in SharePoint. One of the great things is, as I said, no SSP anymore. So you really do live in central admin now. Just flip back to that. That's done. So there you can see the output now, and you can go and customize that, but it tells you how much disk space you need, and it tells you what's going to run on the different things, and that's only a $200,000 US server. Pretty cheap. We'll have 2 of those, thanks. Okay, but I mean, I picked, that was, I think, 100,000 users or something. It was quite a big workload. What have I done? Okay, so some of the things in configuring that are new, especially to 2010, that you need to think about is we now have the ability to manage large lists. There's a great feature in SharePoint 2007 where you can take an Excel spreadsheet, and it might have, say, 50 or 60,000 rows, and you could go export that to SharePoint. And it would go and create a SharePoint list and start loading all of that data up into SharePoint. All that data was then going into a SQL database behind the scenes. SQL actually didn't care too much about it. It was the SharePoint UI that really couldn't handle that amount of data, especially if the clever user then went and did a group by view or started sorting in the view. That could bring your whole SharePoint farm down, or certainly all the sites that were contained inside that content database would all of a sudden start going very slow. So we can now manage the server impact on lists and specify some rules to prevent the end user using some of the SharePoint features if the list exceeds a certain size. And this actually defaults to 5,000 items. So when you get a list with more than 5,000 items, certain things are disabled. You can go in and put an override, so certain people can override the rule, or at certain times of the day. So outside of business hours, you can allow someone to, say, connect with access to that SharePoint list and do some reports off it. So you do get some control over that. If anyone's got large lists, I've always had an example list up on my website of about 60,000 items in it, and it works really, really well. But yeah, for some reason, some people have really poorly performing SharePoint servers, and a large list could bring them down. I mentioned before the mirrored content databases. So if you have a SQL mirror environment set up, mirroring in SQL Server, hopefully your DBA manages for you, then when you create a content database in SharePoint, you can specify if you want that mirror database. And if you've got multiple servers, you can specify which server that's going on. The other one I mentioned, password management. So now SharePoint understands managed accounts that are being used in the farm for things like application pools and services, Windows services. And it can now give you the option from central admin to go and change all the passwords for a particular account across the farm. There's another new feature for granular backup. I'll show you this one. It lets you back up an individual site or site collection, but it also lets you back up an individual list or library so that you can import that on another site. Quite often people go, oh, I've put all of this data into this one particular site. I want to leave the site there, but I want to take all these particular documents from a library, or take this big, 50,000 item list and move that into another site. So you can now do that from the central admin website, which is good. That's just a sample of some of the configuration things that you need to think about, but there's also a whole lot of monitoring things we've built into the product now. So not to take away from System Center, you still want that in place to monitor your SharePoint farm, the whole solution. It's not just about monitoring servers or pinging them to make sure they're going. You want to make sure that you're meeting your SLA, and that's a service that you're offering a business, and that's where System Center is great for monitoring the whole service holistically and producing things like SLA reports back to the business to show that you are meeting availability requirements. The developer dashboard shouldn't really be called developer dashboard because it's great for identifying any kind of performance problem, and you may not have had a developer anywhere near your SharePoint farm. Might be an out-of-the-box vanilla farm, but some users are saying when they use a particular site, it's going slow. So you as IT administrators can use the developer dashboard to identify what is causing that slowness. So that's a great thing to be aware of. It's not just for developers. The other thing is the health analyzer. So SharePoint is analyzing its own health. It's even checking things like, am I going to run out of disk space? Are things misconfigured, like are you using the domain admin account to run all of your application pools under? It will tell you in no uncertain terms that's a bad thing. Every time you log on to the central admin site, there will be this red banner across the top saying you've got some serious issues. So those things don't go away until you fix them. The other thing now is we have a logging database. And you've always heard us say in SharePoint, stay away from the database. Like, you go near that, no Premier support. The logging database is the one thing that you can go for it. You can connect to, you can hook it up to reporting services, hook it up to Excel. You can play with that one to your heart's content. That's the idea of it. And also for developers, rather than them coming up with their own logging solution, we want them to use the logging database. And also, we've hooked in an administration version of alerts as well. So not just alerts that we used to have where end users could subscribe for notifications on changes. There's also alerts for the IT administrator. Those alerts now support SMSing as well. So if you have an SMS gateway, SharePoint can be configured to use that as well. You might just want to keep an eye on your costs there. You don't want to be getting a text message every 10 seconds, especially in the middle of the night. But it is just another way of getting information to you in a timely fashion. So we'll have a demo. have a quick look at some of these features. So in fact, I think the one I'll show you is that export one, and we can see actually what goes on behind the scenes. Excuse me while I sit down. So this is the central admin interface. Now, funny story here. So everyone knows how complex the admin interface was. Even in 2007, it was very hard to remember where a setting was or where one of the administration functions were, and you'd be clicking around trying to find it every single time. A lot of us just started memorising the URLs to certain pages we wanted to go to. And a little tip there is if you always find yourself, I always find myself going to the search page. So rather than having to go to the search service and then click on that and click administer, you've got this really little simple thing here, which is just a links list on the home page. So once you've gone to that admin page a couple of times, copy the URL, add it there on the right-hand side. So every time you go to your central admin site, you can have your own links straight to the things you want to manage on a regular basis. But if we have a look under backup and restore, just some of the options there, a couple of new things in there that you'll see. And this one here, export a site or a list. So this is quite good. So a good way to move a chunk of data between two, whether it's between two sites, two site collections, two web applications, or two completely different farms, that will work. So you can see here I've just picked a particular content library from a site. You can go through and change these, and I can specify where I'm going to save it to. If you've got a farm, you don't know where this timer job is going to run by default, so you want to have a share that you're saving that to that's available to all the servers in the farm. I only have a single server here, so I'll do it to c:\temp. Now this is actually going to run this, and you see I can include full security as well. So if I'm going to re-import this into a server in the same farm, a site in the same farm, or another farm that's in the same domain, that'll work. But if I wanted to export this list out and give it to someone who's on a completely different domain, don't include the security. And if it's a document library, you can specify, or anything that has versioning on it, list or library, you can specify whether you want all the versions exported as well. So this sets up a timer job. It's going to start running straight away, and it tells me here that I'm running this job. Anyone remember the administration toolkit that we released for 2007? So they had the capability to move sites between site collections, but what it didn't work too well with is if you ran two jobs in parallel, which the UI didn't stop you from doing. So we had to put out a KB article saying, try and be smart and don't kick two of them off at the same time. But this is running in the background, and if I go and look at my temp directory, you'll see it's very similar to the the old SharePoint export. Creates a 25 meg file and then moves on to the next file. So you don't get one humongous big file that's too hard to then FTP somewhere or something like that. Breaks them down into 25 meg chunks. So that's how quick that process was. So it's nice and fast to go and export, and that was a couple of hundred documents sitting in a document library that I could now go and import as a document library on another site. Again, that's for administrators only, obviously not for end users. The nice thing about doing this method is when I then import that to another site, all that metadata and the timestamps and who created the documents are all going to be retained. Traditionally, if you just open up the Explorer view from one site and Explorer view from another site, drag and drop those documents across, which is what we ended up doing a lot of the time, you became the owner of all those documents and you lost all of that, the time information about when it was created and last modified. So that's a really good new feature that we've added into the central admin site. Anyone got any questions? I mean, that's really kind of brief. That's just one of the new features. Yep, question down there.
If you export a site or list with workflow, do you still retain the history?
Very good question. I haven't tried that because I know in 2007 I've done that quite often and not retained the history. And so my way around that used to be to export the workflow history out to an Excel spreadsheet, hand that over to the business and say, there's the record of your workflow history. That was my only answer. I haven't tried it. Yep. So, good question. I'll make a note to look that one up, and I will put it on my blog for you. Good question. And I think that deserves a mouse. There you go. You can come up and grab it afterwards, because I'm bound to forget a question at the end of the session. Right. So that's central admin. So that's one big area. You're going to spend a lot of time in there. The configuration wizard is really good when you first set up your farm. If you just want everything turned on, that's a great way to start. A good thing to do, though, if you really want to be the SharePoint expert, install the farm and don't run the wizard, and then try and get everything going manually. So, as I said, the big area there is in the service applications. So these things here, and there are a lot of them. Now, I'm only running SharePoint Foundation because on my laptop that runs nice and fast. But you can see I've got the Office web applications on there. So we've got the service, which is the one on the left, and the indented one is the proxy. And when you use the wizard, unfortunately, it creates all these ugly GUIDs beside everything. Like you can see this one here, it creates those. The advantage of installing yourself is you get to name everything. There's also a good PowerShell script to configure your SharePoint farm and use nice friendly names for everything. And speaking of, wrong way. Speaking of PowerShell, that's where we're up to. So, who here is using PowerShell? Not enough people. Okay. And I can't teach you PowerShell. Go buy a book, watch some webcasts. PowerShell is fantastic. So, remember that old Windows script host thing? That was pretty terrible. I helped write the first book on it, but that was 11 years ago. And that's why I presented at TechEd originally. I had the fresh copies of the book and presented on that. It was great in its day, but it was only good for COM automation. Everything nowadays, certainly from Microsoft, written in .NET, and Windows script host couldn't automate that. So PowerShell is really about automating .NET applications. That's the core strength of it. It's in version 2 now, ships out of the box with Server 2008 2, which is good. And you can download it for those other platforms. When you download it, it includes remote management as well. So it's WinRM as well as PowerShell v2 ship in the one install package. So as I said, works great with .NET, and it's got a lot of standard out-of-the-box system administration capability to do with the registry, the file system, things like that. And from a command line point of view, you can do some pretty complex piping. So most people are used to, in the Unix world, of being able to pipe the textual output of something to the next processor, whereas we can pipe objects, basically, into the next component that can read that object and do more manipulation with that. So it's very, very powerful. From a command line point of view, some of those commands can get a little bit scary. And there's also lots and lots of third-party snap-ins. Everything's based on snap-ins. So SharePoint adds a snap-in so that you get the ability to manage SharePoint through PowerShell. SQL Server has a snap-in. Exchange has a snap-in. So all of our products now aren't allowed to ship without a PowerShell snap-in to do everything. The goal is everything that you can do in the UI. In SharePoint's case, it's even more. So there's things you can do in PowerShell for SharePoint that you cannot do in the UI. So you're going to need to learn this. And it's not too complex. So there is one snap-in, as I mentioned. And so you just, if you run the shortcut on the desktop for the SharePoint PowerShell admin window, it includes this. But if you're using some other PowerShell editor or just the normal PowerShell UI, you need to add the snap-in. And then there are lots of people bandy around different numbers. These are the numbers I'm going to use today. 143 PowerShell commandlets if you've got the enterprise version of SharePoint up and running with everything installed. 531 if you've just got SharePoint Server Standard, and 244 if you've got SharePoint Foundation. So lots of commandlets. Pretty impossible, obviously, to remember them. So the good thing is you get, effectively IntelliSense with this, which is really good. So inline discoverability is the term there, so that you know that everything's going to start with SP. So you're going to be getting or starting or doing something, and the discoverability makes it easy to find the commands. And it is optimized for batch operations. So if you need to go, for example, a classic scenario where I've used this is where you've got someone who's the site collection of a couple of hundred site collections, and they leave the company, and someone new is going to take over that role. You don't want to have to go in as the administrator and allocate a new site site collection admin for each of those sites, that's the ideal place to use a PowerShell command to do it. It's pretty much the only place that you'd want to do it. So there are a few things you need to know. As I said, the snapper must be loaded, otherwise those commandlets are unknown to PowerShell. Another key thing is, for a lot of these commandlets, there are some commandlets that work on the farm-wide settings. And even if you're a server administrator or a farm administrator, you will not have rights to execute those commands. So you do need to add yourself, you actually need to be in the SharePoint shell admin group. So it's a group, and there's a PowerShell command, but you've got to have the rights to be able to run this command to add people to the group. So a bit of a catch-22. So you run it as your farm account initially to add yourself as an administrator so that you can execute PowerShell commands that impact the farm, some of those farm settings, especially some of the service applications. Standard commands to do with sites and site collections, they work fine if you're an administrator. The other thing to remember when you run these commands, some of these commands are working with the database too. So for some of them, you actually need, usually sysadmin rights in SQL Server. If you're going to use a PowerShell command to create a content database, you've got to have rights in SQL Server to create that database. A couple of subtle differences. So some of the commandlets only work on the site administration object versus just the site object. And the other important thing is if you're doing one of those batch operations that's going to go and touch a couple of hundred websites, you've got to be just as careful as developers have to be around memory leaks. So you do have to make sure you do this thing called disposing of objects correctly, and sometimes not all objects should be disposed, so that's a little bit of a trap. The best thing is, it's great if you've got a developer in your organization, because PowerShell is just almost like another .NET language to developers. They go crazy on it. Here's the warning: keep them away from your production SharePoint environment. Okay? Let them run those PowerShell scripts on their dev machine. Let them give them to you so you can run it on your staging machine. Monitor your memory while you run that script. If it all looks good, then go ahead and do it on your production server. But don't just let a developer sit at the console and start typing individual PowerShell commands. There's kind of no undo. Control-Z does not work in PowerShell. Big warning there. So this disposing of objects, now this is a little lesson I didn't realize in my early days of SharePoint 2010, is that in PowerShell, every time you hit enter, that's kind of the end of that thread. Okay, and so the next command's another thread. So trying to dispose of something on yet another thread has got nothing to do with those previous ones. So this doesn't actually work. So the idea is to put all these things on a single command, because that way it is a single thread in SharePoint. So you'll see here that what we're doing by putting the semicolons in, we don't have carriage returns, so these effectively is one PowerShell thread that runs the SharePoint commands, so the dispose is actually working properly. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of. Okay, there's lots of things. Bad spelling. Don't know what that was meant to be. So you're still going to need to run psconfig as a command to set up your farm. There's a couple of things you can't do in PowerShell, but not many things. I haven't yet found an stsadmin command that I now need to run. We were a couple when we were in the beta version of SharePoint, but I haven't found any now. There's a couple of other things you can do with PowerShell with dealing with large collections, and you want to be a bit careful running these on a production environment because they can chew up a lot of memory. The limit, filter, and select options, if you don't know what they are, don't worry, you're still walking, not running. But the other thing I recommend is because we've all got well past DOS prompts, is get a good GUI editor. And there's a couple of good ones out there. Quest have a pretty good one and a bunch of other snap-ins that most administrators would use for Active Directory. So get hold of that. Makes life a lot easier. Okay, and I'm not going to demo a script, okay? So the best thing when you want to do something with PowerShell on SharePoint is go and search on Bing, of course, is where you'll go to do that. Find your PowerShell script and try it on your test machine, make sure it works, and all is good. So what I thought I'd show you is a novel concept. You've got to store your PowerShell scripts somewhere. Why not store them in SharePoint? Or someone might say, why store them in SharePoint? So I want to show you why. Okay, so I just created a list in SharePoint. If you don't know, lists are the most powerful thing in SharePoint. When most people say SharePoint, you immediately think document management or website management. But behind the scenes in SharePoint, even in a document library or a website being managed in SharePoint, it's basically list functionality. So if you can imagine anything you could put in Excel, non-financial, because most people don't use Excel for financial things, they just use it for tracking lists of information. Behind the scenes, SharePoint is just a big list manager, if you like. So here I have effectively a list that I've got a couple of boxes I can put in: the title, the file contents, could be, I should have called it code, and a category, so I can categorize my script and have a description for it if I want. But the nice thing I can do now is I can customize, now that script's stored there, a nice way of viewing that script. So a bit of color coding. I'm going to release this. Hopefully I'll get it finished off tonight. I'm missing one little thing, which is the copy to the clipboard, the code, so you don't have to manually highlight the code. But this is just a piece of open source JavaScript that then renders that plain text that I put into that text box, displays it nicely. People would have seen this on technical blogs or code writers. They use this function. But I've got that embedded in my SharePoint site. So now, as an IT department, you could stick all your PowerShell scripts in there because, after all, they're an asset that the company has invested in your time to write those scripts. Why should they just sit on your C drive or wherever? Stick them into a SharePoint site. The good thing is this list can have versioning on it. So if you get some monster PowerShell scripts, you can version them and put comments in as to why the script was updated. Good central location, one source of the truth for all of your administration scripts. Now, I do have one customer that I only just found out they were doing something kind of similar to this, not as cool on this side, but they were doing some cool stuff in the back end to actually have an execute button there and have a timer job, execute that PowerShell script, capture the results, and in my scenario, stick them back into this list. So that's something that hopefully will get something available that you can run, but I'll package this up as a solution that you can install on your own SharePoint server. Interesting? Cool? Yeah, good place to put scripts, right? Rather than just a network share. On a network share, you'd create folders and try and define, different kind of tasks and stick different scripts in those folders. So that's just something to consider. Okay, there are a lot of resources, and in my PowerPoint in the notes all the links to these. No point having the links in the PowerPoint, you can't click on them. There is a huge amount of online documentation. There is in TechNet, the script repository, which used to be for WSH, is now full of PowerShell scripts, categorized by all the products. So you've got Exchange and SharePoint and SQL Server scripts being uploaded to that script repository. Because there are, I haven't got a prize left, so I won't ask. There's lots of PowerShell commandlets. Can be pretty hard to find them, so I did create on my site a SharePoint list that holds all the commands, and you can group them or sort them or filter them based on the noun or the verb for the commands. That's a quick way to find them, and it works on an iPhone because I built it so I could use it on my own phone, because quite often the server I was working on did not have internet access. Quite often that's what you find in a production environment. So I wanted something where I could quickly get some of the examples and things like that without having to sit there at the command line console in a cold computer room. Zach Rosenfeld is on the product team for PowerShell. The way PowerShell was implemented in SharePoint, his blog is very, very good, and I have the link to that in the notes for this PowerPoint as well. But the key thing is get a book or go on a course on PowerShell. Best investment you can make as an IT administrator. Okay, so something else to demo, the Office web applications. Is anyone running Office web applications? Yep, got one hand. Okay, two, three. Has anyone used the public version of Office web apps? So on your SkyDrive? Yep, a few more hands going up. Anyone use docs.com? So only a few. So on Facebook you can share a document now, and when you share it, it can be viewed on docs.com. Without the end user needing Office. So that's pretty cool. So that's the consumer version of Office web applications that's had all the press, and that's really good. But we have a corporate version of Office web applications, and any customer who buys Office 2010 under volume licensing or has an EA for the desktop, that's all you need. So you're entitled to run Office web applications internally in your organization. Several reasons why you might want to do that, which I'll cover off as well. But all you need to host Office web applications is a SharePoint server. Now, and it doesn't have to be the big SharePoint server, so you don't even need SharePoint cows. You can host Office web applications on SharePoint Foundation. And a lot of people say, oh, but SharePoint Foundation doesn't scale. Well, yes, it does, because SharePoint Server is just an application running on top of SharePoint Foundation. SharePoint Foundation scales out, with the help of a scaled out or a large SQL Server environment, as many web front ends as you want. And Office web applications can be run on all those web front ends. Now, there's two things Office web applications do, and most people are familiar with the fact that the Office web applications can render an Office document in the browser. And that's really good, work in just about any browser, most browsers. Two of the Office applications will use Silverlight if it exists, but it doesn't have to exist. So both Word and Excel and OneNote do not use Silverlight. My brain is going like I'm sure most of yours is going too. But it will work natively in the browser. I've seen it running in Chrome, works fine, runs fine on a Mac, runs in Firefox, as I said. So that's the browsing side of it, most people are familiar with. But the other thing the Office web apps enable is concurrent editing of documents. Okay, so even if you're using the rich client, say you're using OneNote in a meeting, you can have a whole lot of people opening the same OneNote file off the SharePoint site and all editing it at the same time. So it handles that brokering and the locking of who's editing what paragraph or what part of the application, of the content. Now, the web version, at the moment, we only allow concurrent editing in OneNote and Excel. So Word and PowerPoint were not enabled, kind of at the last minute. We expect that to come along in the near future. So we are updating the web apps all the time. If anyone just saw on the consumer version of web apps, we added clip art to all those applications, so you can install or insert any of the same clip art that you have in the rich client application from office.com or office.microsoft.com, which, by the way, is also a SharePoint site, just to show how it scales. So the Office web apps, I've actually been streaming this PowerPoint deck using Office web applications, so I just want to see if it's still working. Anyone in the audience connected to it? Did anyone connect? Yeah, someone's got it still going. Choice. So it's also reliable. I have to go through the logs and see how many people actually connected. So I also was streaming the video at the same time, so that was appearing inside a web part page in SharePoint. So this just shows you how I could quickly do a mashup. Let's get the right one. That one there. So this is just a web part page that's hosting both my Office web app PowerPoint real time. So as I move my PowerPoint backwards and forwards, what happens every client that connects to web apps, this is the PowerPoint broadcast mode. Every second the client just does a quick AJAX call back to the server and say which page should I be on, and if the presenters moved their PowerPoint on, they can do that. So this is great if you don't have live meeting or OCS and you just got cheap old voice conferencing. Well, it's not that cheap, but everyone dials the conference center. The presenter can send his PowerPoint, and the people anywhere in the world only need the browser to view the PowerPoint. So that's another thing you get out of the box, which is really good. Okay, so another place where you can use this is in your document libraries. So the Office web applications, they're great for authors using Office because you get spell checking and grammar checking, and people just love sitting there in Office creating content. Now, if I go and look at this website, SPS. So we produced this thing called the Productivity Hub, which is just a SharePoint site template that you can install. Hello. Might be because I'm logged in on another page as well. Productivity Hub. This is great. It's a little site template you install on your SharePoint server at work. It could be a SharePoint Foundation server. You get a whole lot of errors when you try and install it on SharePoint Foundation server. But I'm about to blog how I got it working on SharePoint Foundation server. You get some nice Silverlight eye candy so that you can, have the ability to go and find documents on how to use Publisher. Not sure of anyone who uses Publisher these days. But what you can do in this solution out of the box where Microsoft ships it, every time you click on one of those documents, it just opens up Word or PowerPoint and shows the user of the document. So I did one little tweak to it so that it now uses the Office web applications to open the document in a web page. How the Office web applications work is the first time someone requests that document, it goes and checks to see whether it's got a cached copy. It uses a SharePoint site to store cached renderings of the documents, and then it's cached so subsequent people are accessing that document super fast. But from here you can see, because I have rights, I can jump into the edit in browser. So I don't even have to open up Office. I could be VPN'd in and just do this straight from a browser without needing any version of Office or the correct version of Office to do this. If you haven't seen it, obviously the ribbon is pretty cool. Very familiar. I have still got a beta version on this machine, but in production you get live preview. So as you hover over things, everything changes right before your eyes, just like it does in the rich client. If you own Office 2010 under volume licensing, why wouldn't you install this? So all you need, as I said, is for a lot of organizations, a single SharePoint Foundation server. You don't even really need a SQL server, because if you're not going to store a lot of content, if it's something for like help content, your company FAQ or the policy documents, just using the SQL Server 2008 R2 Express edition of SQL, that now gives you 10 gigabytes of storage. That's quite a few documents in the 2010 format, and that's no cost. So all you really need is one copy of Windows Server, and you can have all of this if you've got Office 2010 on volume licensing or an enterprise agreement. There is a TechNet article on how to install it and configure it properly. I won't go into that. It's very simple. It doesn't take long at all to get it set up. If you set aside about an hour and a half, you can get your server built, SharePoint, SQL Express installed, SharePoint Foundation installed, and the Office web apps all up and running. So it doesn't take much. And I've left about 2 minutes for questions. That really was the last slide. If anyone does have questions, there are a couple of related sessions that I think are very good. Unfortunately, the top one and the bottom one are conflicting, but troubleshooting tips from the field. If you're an IT guy, definitely go and see Troy. He's been our premier field engineer for the last couple of years on both SQL and SharePoint. Very good. He's going to have lots of tips for you how to not break your SharePoint farm as well as troubleshoot it. DPM, so protecting SharePoint, is a key thing for IT administrators. DPM version 2 is really good. Version 1 was a bit rocky, but version 2 is very good. This one I highly recommend, claims-based authentication in SharePoint 2010. Go to that one and see how Auckland University use it as their learning management system. Students can log on to SharePoint using their Facebook account or their Gmail account, and that's the power of claims authentication. Well, that's part of the power of it. The other part is the reduced amount of administration and controlling access to SharePoint sites, because it's all based on the claim. And if you're going down the Hyper-V track, I thoroughly recommend this, although it's not a SharePoint session. It's around how to tweak and get the most out of your Hyper-V environments. That's another very good session to go to if you're planning on deploying SharePoint in a virtualized environment. So thank you very much, and enjoy the beers and wines tonight. Thank you.